Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting parents whose children have passed. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at this meeting is voluntary. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Discussions here are confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Zoom meetings run by leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here. Welcome, Ali, and everyone. You are going to want to read this book for sure.
Yes, and thank you for being here, Ali. Thank you for reading that, Irene. This is going to be such a nice hour, and I'm looking forward to it. If you'd like to just write in the chat box who you are, where you're from, if you're an affiliate leader or a caring listener or a board member, please do so. But I'm going to quickly read Ali's bio. Ali Norell is a psychic medium, author, and healer. She is also the mother of 3 children here and 1 in spirit. Since early childhood, Ali has been able to see, hear, and sense the spirits of those who have passed and those who serve as guides from the spirit world. Following many and varied careers, she made a decision to follow a different path and spent many years developing her mediumship skills and learning all she could about life and death. Following her daughter's passing, Ali wrote a blog about her healing, Remembering Romy, and followed this with a memoir, The Truth Inside, in which she shared details of her daughter's passing and the numerous spiritual experiences following it. Ali completed a 2-year master's level creative writing qualification in 2021 and a year-long certificate in humanistic counseling skills with the Gestalt Center in London in 2023. She uses Gestalt psychotherapy techniques along with tarot cards in her work as a psychic medium. Despite having one foot firmly in the other, she believes in demystifying spiritualism and taking it out of the shadows and into public awareness as a thing of positivity to aid those who grieve and offer hope to all that the passing of our loved ones is just a transition rather than the end. Her intention is very much one of bringing spirit down to earth. She lives in Brighton with her husband, 3 children, and 3 cats. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ali Norell. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Irene, and hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm just thrilled that we're going to be able to talk about this book. Again, this beautiful book that actually she designed the cover for, which is rare, but she had seen this, is a book that Irene has said she wished that she had written this book. This is just such a perfect book. There's so much information in it, but there's also It's beautifully written, and as Irene was saying earlier, she felt like she was a member of Ali's family. Could you tell us just a little bit about your inspiration for the book and about Romy?
Of course. So my daughter Romy, she's the third of our four children, and she was born in 2014, and she passed when she was very young. So she was maybe 4 months old, perfectly healthy all the way through, great pregnancy, great birth, and just had something akin to a brain aneurysm or a hemorrhage. So her passing was very sudden, for me, extremely traumatic. Because I was alone with her when everything unfolded. So for me, writing is something that I had always found a lot of sort of comfort and support in throughout my life. I always, that's what I wanted to do with my life. And I drifted towards various careers that involved writing, like public relations, but never really sat and thought I can write a book. And after Romy passed, somebody suggested that I wrote a blog. Quite frankly, at that point, I was in a really quite serious state of depression. My two older children were then sort of 4 and 5 years old, so it was quite full on. But I was really struggling with my grief in a big way. And I found, even for me, normally quite articulate, I found it very difficult to express, even to friends and close family, exactly what I was going through and why it was perhaps the smaller aspects of daily living as a bereaved parent that were proving more of a struggle than the bigger ones. And by that, I mean, and I'm sure that a lot of you in this group would identify with some of these things. The thing that people do when they're sort of like frightened to talk about your child or mention their name because they think you're going to start crying. Actually, that's, for me, that was what I wanted them to mention her name. But on the other hand, we had people sending us, holiday greetings cards months after our daughter had passed, with pictures of their entire family on, which was the kind of thing that at that point was driving me mad. And I couldn't express this to anybody, how that was making me feel so angry. So I started to write a blog, really to try and explain to people what my life had become. And from that, there were a lot of chance happenings, but it was suggested to me that I maybe turn some of this writing from my blog into a book, into a memoir, which is what I did. But obviously Romy is the inspiration for it. But actually, the question I'm most commonly asked is, was it cathartic? Did you write this book to process your grief? And honestly, no, because at this point I was then pregnant with our youngest child, my youngest son, who's now 8 years old. He was a newborn when I started to write this book. And when I say that I wrote this book in 1 year, during the 1.5 hours a day that my son slept during the day, I was like, I was like a maniac. I was literally, I'd put him down to sleep and I would literally just write for an hour and a half. And I was producing thousands and thousands of words. So I'm firmly of the opinion that this book was in some way given to me. And I know that I can use that term in this group without people raising eyebrows. Sometimes people say, what do you mean? I just feel that it was given to me. There are things in this book that even now when I read back, I recognize my own writing, but some of the themes in there, I find myself looking at it and thinking, did I write that? I just feel like there are some important messages in this book about how we deal with and speak about the transition of death, and what this means for humanity and how we are together as a collective. I feel like there's something that didn't come from me, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. And I find it very interesting that you talk about the fact that you certainly people who were not so close to you at the time came closer, but a lot of the people that were very close to you went away. And maybe you could just talk about that, because that's something that I think happens to all of us.
Right. So yeah, there was a friend in particular. Well, she is a dear friend now. At the time, I knew her very slightly through one of my children and one of her children. And I remember that period, and I'm talking the sort of the initial weeks after Romy passed. She just showed up on my doorstep and said, I'm here to come out for a walk with you. And I said, well, okay, but and I don't know what made me say it. She actually, she's an actor, this friend, a lot of comedy in her during this part of her career. And I remember saying to her at the time, this might sound really weird. I feel like I need to get out of here. I either need to scream or I need to just laugh. And she said, fine, let's just go for a walk. And we became such close friends. She was one of the few people who actually, stepped over the threshold and said, I'm coming in. I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to make you tea. I'm going to watch your kids. I'm just going to be here and I'm going to sit in this with you. And I didn't find out until much later that her father had taken the decision to end his life when she was younger. And so this made more sense to me because I felt that she had this understanding of unexpected grief and unexpected, this feeling of like, this shouldn't have happened, or why did this happen? So she had some kind of connection there. There were neighbors who were just bringing food and leaving it on the doorstep. People I barely knew, which was, extraordinary. I find that extraordinary. It brought out the absolute best in people. But on the other hand, people that I knew quite well were, literally running down supermarket aisles to avoid me. My son was very little at the time, and he would be, oh, look, there's, and waving. And I'd be saying, it's okay, we'll just kind of go over here and get the cereal, because I could just see the look of panic, and they were literally running rather than sort of having to face me and my grief in the supermarket. A very close friend of mine from childhood, I invited her to speak at the memorial service that we held for Romy, which she did. Spoke for me for a time afterwards. And this is a woman that I had known since I was 14 years old. We'd been very close friends, and I never heard from her again after that. She stopped sending birthday cards to my children. I messaged her to ask if she'd like to meet at some point, and she made a couple of excuses, and then she just disappeared. She never spoke to me again, which is extraordinary to me, but I'm sure, I can see people nodding. I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people in here.
Well, I think that we find our tribe through this, and I do believe that your very close friend, having experienced something like that early on, obviously learned this enormous compassion and knew the language, knew how to speak about this, and wasn't afraid to talk about Romy and be able to spend time with you. But yes, having people run down the supermarket aisle, I think we've all had that. And it's always kind of comical because you think that they're going to come up. And I have always said that in that situation, if anybody's watching and doesn't know what to do in that situation, instead of running the other way, and instead of feeling like you have to know the right thing to say, you can just go up and hug the person and say no words, because that is exactly what I had from my son's football coach. And it was one of the most beautiful things that I had heard. And that was all I needed from him. And he had tears in his eyes. And I know that it was very hard for him. But I think that physical contact and just knowing that you aren't going to be rejected by society for a certain amount of time is something that's really reassuring. But
Yes.
I really would love to also talk about the fact that you are a practicing medium and now you're getting back into mediumship, and you have been your whole life. Maybe you could tell a little bit about your younger life and how you knew that you were a medium and how that developed.
Sure. Well, I remember as a very, very young child, having imaginary friends, which I think is very common with many children. But my mother told me, and you know, my mother's very psychic but chooses not to go there. She doesn't really like the fact that that's there, so she just kind of like puts it to one side. And but she, you know, often in my life she's had very strong feelings about things which were important. I remember her telling me once that she had this very vivid imaginary friend. He was a young boy called David, and she would speak to him constantly when she was around 2 or 3. And it was much later in life that she discovered that my grandmother had actually miscarried a boy before she was born. And so, you know, our theory is that she was somehow connecting with her, you know, her older brother, her sibling, who she didn't even know that she'd had at that point. So I do remember having an imaginary friend. That wasn't the situation for my parents. But I do wonder now whether I was kind of connecting with or seeing a person or persons who, you know, weren't in the world with us. But the most seminal thing that I recall was, I think when I was 14 years old, I saw my late grandfather in my bedroom, and I was going through a very difficult time in my 14-year-old life at the time. My parents had just decided that we were going to move to another area of the country, and this was, you know, massively upsetting for me. I was 14, I was at school, I had all my friends, I was in the teams, and, you know, loved my school. And I really didn't want to make this move, but I didn't want to tell my dad that because you know, he'd worked hard to get this new job. So I'd sort of kept it all to myself. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night and sat up in bed, and there was my grandfather at the bottom of my bed, literally as clearly as as if my father had walked in. I saw him that clearly. And that has very rarely happened to me since. Normally when I see clairvoyantly, I kind of see it's like the inside of my forehead here is like a movie screen, and I can see images on that. But it's very occasionally I will kind of see a person in spirit as an actual person. And there was a lady talking in my ear. So I was sort of looking at my grandfather and I was talking to him, but it was almost like she was some kind of translator. And I can remember this woman saying to me, well, you know, slightly, you know, she was like, well, he's been very worried about you, you know, almost as if like, you know, look what you've done now. You've made him show up in your bedroom. She was a little bit stern about it. But saying, yeah, he's been really worried about you, but he wants you to know that everything is going to be okay. You're going to do really well in your new school, and everything is going to be fine. And then she said this odd thing. She said, he's saying to say, it was him who helped your dad. And a week previously, my dad had been driving. Obviously, our country is much, much smaller than yours, but at the time he was making like a 2-hour drive. He'd started his new job about 2 hours from where we were living, and it was taking a while before we could move the rest of the family up there. So Dad was driving up and down to work each week and coming back at the weekends. And on one of his trips back down, he came home, he was quite shaken up, and he told us that he'd had this strange incident where he had been driving along the motorway, and a lorry had been loaded with a lot of metal poles, like scaffolding, driving in front of him, and it had suddenly slammed on the brakes, and all of these poles had shot towards the windscreen of my dad's car, and he was alone in the car. And he said he was telling us this, that when he'd arrived home, and he said, I honestly thought that my time was up, or, you know, he said they were coming straight for the windscreen. I slammed on my brakes, and he said I actually just put my hands up because I thought I've just got to protect myself from these poles. You know, forget the car. And he heard this crash, and when he looked up, the poles had just hit the front bumper of the car, which he was very confused about because he couldn't understand how it could have happened when the amount of space between the two vehicles had been so small. So he relayed us all of this. And as he was saying all of this, I remember blurting out, that was your dad. You know, he moved them. And my parents have always been very open-minded. So they didn't say, what do you mean? Or don't be stupid. They just kind of said, okay, and carried on talking. And then a week later, I have this sort of visitation from my grandfather. And what was really particularly key for me is that I was given this message that, yes, that was him. You know, it wasn't your dad's time, and he helped his son because it wasn't, you know, that was not supposed to happen. So that's the sort of the earliest recollection I have of receiving some kind of communication from spirit. And I really appreciate that my parents always, we used to sit around discussing life after death and spirit communication, and they would tell me all their experiences. So I so appreciate that I had that in my upbringing when I was that young, because it kept my mind very open.
And it must have been very reassuring as well when Romy transitioned. But you stopped mediumship at that point. It was something that was maybe too difficult, too painful to be working as a medium.
Yes, as I write about in my book, I had lots of experiences with Romy, and I sought out sittings and meetings with different mediums, some known to me and some unknown to me, and I did find that hugely reassuring. I think two things happened. The week before Romy died, I'd been working as a birth doula for about 10 years, sort of around having my own children. And a week before Romy passed, I remember saying to my husband, you know what, I've just got a feeling I'm not going to go back to doing that. And I actually said, I've been working with birth for so many years, and I think I'm going to be working with death. And I couldn't make sense of that at the time either. It didn't occur to me that that could have meant mediumship, because that's been something I'd always pursued almost as an interest. It's always been there in my life. I've sat in development circles, I've read, I've studied, I've done workshops, but it never really occurred to me that that could be part of my working life, or partly because of the sort of the reception that it certainly got back then, 10 or 20 years ago. So I'd sort of made this intention that I thought I was going to be working with death. But then obviously when Romy did pass, writing the book was one thing, but I knew I would never go back to working as a doula, because I had this terrible fear that something, what if the worst happened during a birth scenario? Would I be able to handle it? And I didn't think that I could then. And similarly, I thought I can't possibly work as a medium, because I'm going to have to confront other people's grief, and I can't do it. And interestingly, my mother said to me at the time, she said, I think you are going to work with she actually said other grieving parents. She said, I think you're going to work with other bereaved parents because you're going to be able to help them. And I said, no, I can't. And it literally it's been 10 years this year since Romy transitioned. And I would say it was last year when I actually came to the realization that actually it feels like a calling, and I am ready, and I can do it, and I know I can help, and it feels very important. But it took me a really long time to get to that place, because really, I think in retrospect, I was just in a very, very deep depression. It was taking all of my energy to exist in all of the areas of my life that I had to exist in, and I didn't really have a lot left over for anything else at that point.
Well, I can understand the depression. And at the same time, you were having so many things that were happening in the house that were validated by mediums. Maybe you could tell us about some of those different things that were happening that were proving without a shadow of a doubt that Romy was still with you.
Sure. Well, I think the one that really blew me away the most is probably the most. It sounds so unlikely. Even when I tell the story now, I think, "Oh, come on, really?" But that was kind of why it was so powerful at the time. So, maybe a couple of months after she passed, so we have our older children. They were sort of 5 and 4, thereabouts, and I kept coming downstairs in the morning. Our older son, in particular, who was 5 at the time, did have a habit at that point of getting up at 5:30 or 6 a.m. and running around the house and insisting that everyone else got up. So I was used to getting up early in the morning, and sometimes he had come down first. So I was coming down in the mornings, and several mornings in quick succession, I noticed that our TV, which was one of those, it was on a stand, and you could swivel it sort of 180 degrees. It wasn't wall mounted. We had it on the top of a piece of furniture, so it was fairly high up. And you could, literally turn it through 180 degrees, which we never did, because our living space was so small, you could only have the sofa in one place and the TV could only really face one direction. There was no point in moving it anywhere because there weren't any other seats. So I was coming down in the mornings and the TV had sort of done a 180. It was facing a really strange angle and it had really gone through a full half turn. And at the time, I remember just, I was half awake. I was thinking, oh, it was annoying. I kept putting the TV back, thinking, what's going on? Feeling cross with my husband because I thought, oh, he's moved it because he's trying to get to the plug socket behind that piece of furniture and, charge his phone or something. And I kept thinking I must make a mental note to tell him not to do it or to move it back. And then I thought, oh, it's my son. He's coming down and he's just, he's trying to get the TV on. And so he's sort of knocking it somehow. And neither of those particularly made sense, but obviously you look for a rational explanation. But it kept happening. It happened about maybe 4, 5, 6 mornings in a row. And on one particular morning, I think my husband happened to be downstairs. And so I, at this point, said, look, could you stop doing this? If you move could you put the TV back? It's so annoying. And he said, well, I thought you were doing that. I haven't done it. So then we both immediately concluded, oh, okay, it must be Casper, our son. But then we sort of looked at it and sort of thought, well, it's really high up. If he was holding on, he's 5, he'd have pulled that down. It made us very aware of a safety issue. So if he'd pulled this down, he could really hurt himself. So we sort of thought nothing of it. And then I ended up going to some kind of psychic fair here, and I booked myself to have a sitting with a medium. And everyone was booked. There were about 5 or 6 mediums there. I didn't really know. Usually I try to see if I'm drawn to somebody. I just thought, oh, I didn't even really want to. I thought, oh, really? I'm not in the mood to do this. But I saw this woman's table and it had a huge sort of lit up angel on it. And I just thought, well, if she's got a space, then I'll have the sitting. And I approached her table and she had 1 space, which was half an hour from when I was there. So I just signed up for it. And I sat down, and it was one of the most compelling sittings I've ever had. She was a complete stranger to me, having worked in the world of mediumship for a little while. At that point I did know some of the people, or I seen them give demonstrations before. I'd never met this woman before, and the first thing she said to me was, you have a daughter in spirit. She was very young when she passed. It was very recent. She gave details of her passing, that it was very sudden, that it was something related to her head. And then out of the blue, she said to me, are things moving in your house? And I said, no. And she said, is your TV moving? And at that point I thought, oh my goodness. So I said, well, actually, yes, it has. And she said, well, this is your daughter in spirit, and she's trying to, sometimes this happens, she is using her energy and using the energy of others in spirit to do these things to make you aware that she is still around you, and she is, in your home, and she is aware of what's going on with your family. But, she is doing that. And I sort of sat with it, and I went home and I thought, and I kept, because as much as I believe in an afterlife, and I've worked with mediumship for most of my adult life, I always try to seek another explanation first. I don't know why I do that. It feels important to me to find balance. I think also because I very much want to reach people who it would help the most. And very often those people are the people who say, well, that's a load of rubbish. And they're very quick to, so often I'm trying to preempt, okay, well, what would I be thinking if I were really skeptical? And I just see if I can rule that out first. And I brought it to my husband and I said, look, this woman has said this, and so we went back in again and we tried to sort of look, okay, how could this be happening? We were literally with, like moving the TV around and getting our son to stand in front of it to see how tall he was. And actually, in the end, what really nailed it for me was the fact that it never happened again. And that's happened repeatedly to me, actually. Things have happened. I've received validation from a medium. I've perhaps not taken it completely at face value, and I've still questioned it slightly. And then I've suddenly realized that actually the thing that was happening has completely stopped happening since the medium told me that it was happening, if that makes any kind of sense. And the second time it happened was similarly, I have photographs on my wall. We don't have we have a couple of photographs of Romy around the house, but there's a row of photographs in my living room of all 4 of my children. And one medium I saw once said to me, I'm seeing your living room and I'm seeing 4 pictures on the wall of all of your children. And then just like that, he said to me, one of them's been moving, hasn't it? And it had. Romy's picture had consistently been, I kept finding it at a really strange angle. And again, it was maybe 3, 4 times. And it was sort of, oh, that's weird. That picture's crooked again. I'm just going to straighten it up. And about the 4th time it happened, I stopped myself and I just said out loud to Romy, okay, I know this is you. You're doing this, aren't you? I know you're doing this. Thank you for showing me that you're here. It's like, this is really amazing. And it stopped happening after I acknowledged it. And it was months later that I saw this particular medium and he had flagged up that, yeah, your daughter's picture is moving and she wants to corroborate that is her. So that's often the telling thing for me. It stops once you realize what it is.
Well, I've had similar experiences, and actually, one medium told me to look up, and I had some incredible experiences in our garage with this sliding trap door that kept opening above an electric golf cart. There was no way that anyone could get up there without getting the golf cart out of the garage. And it happened twice in a row. I would come into the garage and I'd smell insulation and I'd think, this is weird. And it was in the summertime. And then all of a sudden, the second time my husband had to move the golf cart out, get a ladder and get up there and close the trap, I realized this is what she had just told us the day before. Look up. He was sending us signs from up above. And once we realized, it stopped. It's so clear at that point that this is something that is being done just to allow us to know that they're here and not just to aggravate us. But until we don't understand the sign, they're going to keep doing it, right?
Right.
Pictures go sideways and things like that. Well, I love the fact that out of this enormous tragedy, you have developed a knowing that is something that I think that all of us develop as well. That first of all, this life is our school, and when our kids get over to the other side, they're home. They're very lucky because they are home. But I like the way that you put this. The reason that we are here is to learn, and the lesson is love. And that love is pure, unconditional love. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that for us.
Yeah, that's something I honestly, I think about it daily, actually, particularly with everything that is going on in the world at the moment. The more devastation and the more difficulty that we experience, I think, as individuals and as a human race. I always keep coming back to, gosh, if we just all focused on love, then I don't think there would be anything else to focus. That is it. That it reminds me of a story my mother told me once about, and I can't remember whether this is an urban myth now, whether this is, it's one of those like, oh, this happened to somebody your grandmother knew, but it's a beautiful story about, I think this was somebody known to our family who was coming to the end of his life. And the last thing that he said to his relative sitting next to him was, oh, it's all so simple. They were the last words he spoke. And that really, she told me that when I was a child, and it really lodged in my head because I thought, well, what is simpler than just love? The love that we have for our children, is that pure form of love. And I do think that there's some connection with, those of us who are continuing on in this life without a child or children. Of course, we have to go through I always say this, I feel like there are 2 sides to my grieving process. There's the human side, which I still do experience, by the way, you know, even 10 years afterwards, as I'm sure you do too, I still have days where I feel depressed and sad and angry, and that it's not fair, and that, you know, I have 4 children and my other child is supposed to be here, and that it's not fair that this happened. I still, that's my human experience. But I also very strongly feel a spiritual experience, which is that, you know, in the early days, my husband he's a very spiritual person. We have sort of, I would say we have overlapping spiritual beliefs, but they're certainly not identical. He's very interested in Buddhism and that form of spirituality. And we were very, very fortunate in that that kind of enabled us to work through our grief and to remain close rather than, you know, going apart. We had many long conversations about, you know, well, why is this? I remember saying to him, why has this happened? And he turned to me and he said, well, why not? And which felt very harsh at the time, but actually I think those are very wise words, because it made me think, well, hang on, yes, why not? And what we ended up, we repeatedly kept saying to each other, okay, well, what do we have to learn? There must be something that we have to learn from this experience, because if we subscribe to the idea, as we do, that our children choose us, and that we are, you know, it is destined that we go on this journey through life with people who we, you know, attract into our environment, our soul group, like-minded people, people who feel very familiar to us. You know, if we experience this, the trauma of the detachment from this being who, you know, we called to us, who we feel is so much part of us, then there must be a learning experience, and it must be connected to love. So I don't have any huge spiritual answers, but I'm always questioning. And yeah, I think for me, I always go back to, you know, what do I need to learn? If there is something that I'm finding difficult, either about my grief or just life in general, I ask myself that question. Well, okay, well, what do I have to learn? What do I have to learn? And how can I bring love into this situation? For me, with Romy's passing, it was to begin with, you know, writing and sharing, and hoping that perhaps just by writing my story and some of the experiences that have happened to me, maybe, you know, if one other parent picks up that book and reads it and feels some comfort, or realizes that, yeah, their picture that's been wonky on the wall for 6 weeks might actually be their child trying to communicate with them, you know, then that's opening up that love and helping other people to feel more open to receiving love from their children in spirit, and any of their loved ones in spirit for that matter.
Exactly. And I love what you say, because I think that all of us have experienced this and understand it, that the truth is not out there. The truth is actually inside of us. That's where we find the truth. And maybe you can elaborate on that and just tell a little bit about how this affected you, understanding this. I think that anyone who goes through the passing of a child, first of all, reevaluates everything in their life, and they read as many books as possible. But that one thing, I think, for me, changed everything, to know that I shouldn't be looking for the truth someplace else. It's right here within me.
Yes. Certainly, as you know, when I work with mediumship, when I work with clients, very often, you know, that's the thing I want them to try. And for me, I've done my job if I can connect that person to the truth. You know, there's a lot of knowing your truth being bandied around at the moment, and I don't mean in a glib sense of the phrase. I mean, I feel that I've done my job well as a medium or a psychic if I have helped somebody, facilitated them to sort of just reconnect with what's really inside them. Because I do believe, in having now studied psychotherapy for a short time, I went into that world because I wanted to understand, you know, how our minds process these things and how we access our inner knowing. And on that journey, I also discovered that, really famous, preeminent, eminent psychotherapists such as Jung was fascinated with the tarot. You know, he saw it as the story. His archetypes are all, you can pin them to the tarot, for example. And So, and this idea of the collective unconscious, everyone being connected. So I think if you even look at that theory, Jung's theory of the collective unconscious, of the idea that we are all somehow linked together, then it becomes easier to access this idea that, okay, well then just because I'm sitting on a chair and my feet are on the ground and I'm here in the physical world, it doesn't mean that what I can't see doesn't exist. My understanding of the spirit world is that actually it's not how we are often taught to think about heaven, for example, in a religious context. And I know as a child, I then imagined heaven to be, another whole world that was up in the sky somewhere. And I came to understand, my understanding of the spirit world is that it's very much around us. It's all around us, which is why something that I often experience, and I'm going to bet that a lot of people in this group are going to say they feel this too. When I have a connection with spirit, I have this prickling sensation, particularly on my forearms, but it often goes up and down my body like an energy. And I think that's something that a lot of people experience and perhaps don't understand what they're experiencing, or we dismiss it because that's the environment that we live in. But it's those things, it's recognizing those things. That is the truth inside, to me, understanding how we really exist in this world and opening our minds to the idea that, yeah, there is a whole other world in and around us, particularly those of us who have a child who has transitioned. It's, that's our child. Our child is always going to be in our heart and in us. And so I do believe that there is, even though on a human level it's brutal and it feels like a tragedy to have to continue without a child or children, I also believe that it's on a spiritual level, I feel a sense of privilege, if that doesn't sound a little strange. I feel that it's a gift in some way. I feel there are many gifts that Romy has given me. So even though I don't get to be here with her as she grows up in the physical world, I do very much feel her and understand that she is around me. We were talking briefly before the meeting, Irene and Elizabeth, and I was saying how I'm absolutely certain that my daughter has directed me to be here with this group now. I've been aware of its existence for some time, but it's too long to explain now, but you know the story. It was a series of quite odd events that put me in connection with you, Elizabeth, and I feel that these things they're not coincidences, and I certainly didn't make it happen. It just transpired because and again, I come back to love. Then if your intention is pure and your intention is love, then everything opens up.
That's beautiful. And I think that you are exactly right. And what's kind of exciting is that, first of all, that you're going to be flying from the UK to spend time with us at the conference, which will be wonderful. Second of all, Gordon Smith is going to be there. And I would love for you to tell the story about Gordon Smith, if possible, so that people know, because almost everyone here knows Gordon Smith and knows how wonderful he is anyway. But that would be a fun thing to have others hear about.
Oh, sure. So, I'm thrilled that America knows Gordon Smith now, because he's a very, very well-known medium here in the UK and has been for a very long time. So when I first began to sit in Psychic Development Circle over 20 years ago, I trained and studied at a place called the College of Psychic Studies in London, which is quite well known. And just not far from there is this little spiritualist church in Notting Hill in London. And it was known for a couple of very gifted mediums, but Gordon Smith in particular was known to give demonstrations of mediumship at this spiritualist church. And I took I don't think he was my husband at that point, but my husband before he was my husband, and my parents, and we went to this little spiritualist church, which was absolutely packed, to watch Gordon Smith give a demonstration of mediumship. And I believe that a couple of years previously, there'd been a TV program about this spiritualist church, and Gordon had featured on it. And in particular, he had been featured for working with parents whose children transitioned to spirit. So we went along, and he did this incredible demonstration of mediumship. And what stuck in my mind, and I've seen so many of these demonstrations, I've been involved with them, I've given them, I've seen probably hundreds. That one really stuck in my mind because I remember that Gordon came to a couple whose son had recently passed. And I can remember still, I didn't even have children then, but I remember how emotional that was to witness, and also the relief and the comfort that he gave to them by validating, you know, their son's life and his continuation to live after, you know, what we would refer to as death. It was a really powerful experience, which we all talked about for a long time. So then many years later, I'd written I'd been writing my blog, I'd written my book, and I knew that it was going to be published. My publisher had offered me a contract. And I had this conversation with my husband where, well, annoyingly, my husband came up with the title of my book. You know, I hate that he did that. Such a clever title, and I wanted to come up with that, but he did. And we were talking, and I said, you know what, I can see the cover of my book. I've had this dream, and I've got this vision in my mind. I know exactly how it's going to look. And I went to my publisher and I said, well, I'm sorry, unless you're like J.K. Rowling, you know, just step back from the book cover. You don't get to design your own book cover. You know, we have people who do that. So I said, well, can I just email them and just tell them about my, you know, my dream and my vision in my head? And bless them, they actually recreated the cover of my book is exactly as I had sort of literally dreamt it. And on the cover of that book, I said to my husband, yeah, Gordon Smith's going to endorse my book, which was really arrogant of me because Gordon Smith didn't know me from the next person, and I'd never met him personally. And he's like, you know, the UK's most famous medium. And my husband just said, okay, great. And I tried to track him down, and I emailed people, and I couldn't get anything. And then up popped this website that told me that he was teaching a workshop on mediumship down the road in Eastbourne, which is about half an hour's drive from Brighton, where I live. So I booked myself on this workshop, and I'm so glad I did it. Incidentally, it was an amazing experience, and I learned so much, and I got to study with Gordon a little bit, along with a lot of other people. And then I had these 3 chapters of my book printed out, and I just sort of pounced on him in the tea break and just sort of really embarrassed myself and said, you know, you don't know me, and I've written this book, and you know, it is going to be published, but you know, could you possibly just take these chapters, and you know, if you can find even like a sentence to say about it, I'd just be so grateful. And he was really gracious and really kind. And you know, I walked off just thinking, oh my gosh, how, you know, I'm probably never going to hear from him again, and that's so embarrassing. And he actually came to me on the second day of the workshop. He found me and he said, I read all of your chapters last night. I love your book. I'd be really happy to endorse it. Like, what do you want me to say? Which was honestly it's up there with one of the best moments of my life. Although I did really stalk him, which is embarrassing, but he endorsed my book, bless him. And he's just a phenomenal human being. He really is, and he's one of the best mediums I've ever seen. He's exceptional. He's just an exceptional person.
We feel very grateful that he has wanted to help the parents of Helping Parents Heal. And he does it selflessly. He does it with so much heart, with so much compassion. And I think that especially this past year, when he had a terrible flood in his house right after the conference, the house was wiped out. He had to go live someplace else. He was still doing these meetings with us by Zoom. He was still fitting time in. He's just a really great person, and I'm excited that he's going to be at the conference as well. One of the things that you have written as a talking point is make it count, and I would love to kind of use that as one of the last things that we're going to talk about this book, because I think that that's such an important part of our lives as shining light parents, to be able to understand that our lives are not over, that they've actually almost just begun when you were talking about the gift of Romy being able to all of a sudden realize what this life is all about. But could you tell us a little bit more about Make It Count?
Sure. I think, well, there's the obvious sort of understanding of that, really, isn't there? Which is that, if you've experienced something that has challenged you and pushed you to your limit, both on a human and a spiritual level, you have a choice, I think. I'm very inspired by Viktor Frankl's work. He wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl was a very eminent psychotherapist, but he had also been in Auschwitz. And he writes, it's a very, very powerful book. And the thing that I took away from it rang in my ears a lot in the early days of my grief, because he said, there is always choice. And he, is relating this directly to his experience in Auschwitz and saying, yes, but the one thing that nobody can take from you is how you mentally approach the situation that you were in. And so I took that on board. I do have a clear memory of sort of, the day or two following Romy's passing when, I couldn't get out of bed. I'd actually asked my husband, could he get a doctor to bring me something to knock me out? I just, I had family there taking care of my children. Aside from sort of wanting to join Romy, I just thought, I just want to not be present. I'm going to take a load of medication so I don't have to, face any of this. And I'm just going to do this for as long as I need to, and I'm never going to get out of my bed. That's kind of the point I was at. And my 5-year-old son came into the room and just really innocently said, well, Mummy, are you going to walk me to school? And there was this sort of collective, everyone in the house, no, Mummy's not going out anywhere. And I had this real moment of clarity where I thought, okay, this is a choice. I can stay in this bed, or I can get up and I can walk my son to school, because he's 5 and he didn't ask for any of this to happen, and he doesn't really understand what's going on. And so, I can choose. And I thought, right, I'm choosing to walk to school. And, people tried to dissuade me from it. And it wasn't a pleasant experience. We were living in a very small village at the time. And so whereas some people were incredibly supportive, it felt like being in a goldfish bowl. But I got up and I did it. And that sort of set me on the path to, okay, make it count. I just thought, we've got all of these opportunities and these moments in life. And I think when we lose anyone close to us, it makes it the idea that life can be short, or that, I feel like we've all been put here for a purpose. And I've always believed that. And I think the reason I moved away from mediumship and the spiritual world after Romy's passing is because I really lost my faith in that. I just kind of thought, well, if my purpose was to not have one of my children with me, then I'm not interested. I'm out. And it took me a long time to come back to the knowing that, no, hang on, my daughter's life on this earth ended, mine hasn't. And also, I believe that her life is continuing elsewhere, and that, there is no death. She hasn't ended. It's just her physical presence that's no longer here. And my life on this earth is still very much here. And I have a purpose that I have to fulfill. So even if I don't know what that is, I'm going to make the choice to get out of bed every morning and do everything to the best of my ability. And on some days, that's going to be not very much at all. But on others, I can achieve great things, and I can be an example to my children that, if something terrible happens and you fall down, you can get back up and you can just start to put one foot in front of another. And, we have that strength because we are spiritual beings. I think that's my understanding of that.
That's beautiful. And I must say that when Morgan transitioned that same evening, my daughters were in the living room. My husband was in there as well. And I could clearly see a fork in the road, either me curled up on the bed with a bottle of vodka, maybe, or taking care of these beautiful daughters who deserve my attention just as much as Morgan does. And I'm sure Morgan was telling me right then, hey, listen, Mom, you can't abandon these two girls. And so I think that this whole journey from the time that we have a loved one transition when they're young is all about choice, about the way that we're going to either celebrate those children every single day and do everything that we can in our lives to honor them and to make them proud, or if we're going to just give up and not want to do those things that we know they want us to do. We know that they want us to be moving forward and healing. At the same time, I always want to say that time and space don't matter over there. So if it does take a while for people to get on that path of wanting to honor their kids and celebrate them, and if they want to stay in bed for a while and spend as much time as they need to heal, it doesn't affect them at all. They know that ultimately we're going to get up and we're going to do things to honor them. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's beautiful. We have just a few minutes left. Irene, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask? I know that you, your voice is kind of tight, but anything that you'd like to say?
No, I just want to say again how much I enjoyed the book. And it's so funny because I was thinking for a while, I have these pictures of Venice in my kitchen. And it's one of the last trips I took with my daughter was to Venice. And they keep moving. And I'll go into my dining room and I'll say to my husband, you know, what are you doing? Or maybe the cleaning girls are dusting them. But I know now that's why Carly's just letting me know that she's around and moving the pictures. But
Amazing. Oh,
yes,
that's so wonderful.
yeah, I just want to say it's one of the best books that I've read in a long time. I really enjoyed it, and I encourage everyone to get the book to read it. And it's just so nice to meet you, Ali, and I can't wait to give you a hug in August.
Oh, likewise, Irene. And I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for spending your time. It's this evening for me. I don't think it is for you. It's 9 o'clock in the evening here. But thank you for spending your time to join us. It's a real privilege to have your presence. And thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to meet you in person in August too.
Well, I feel very grateful to Theresa for introducing us. Theresa Cheung is just such a huge connector, and she's such a lovely person as well. And this book, again, as Irene is saying, is just amazing. It's the book that I think everybody wants to read after their child has passed, or wants to write it actually. But if you can't, if you can't write it, then you should read it. So,
Yes.
in any case, thank you so much for being with us. And we always ask everyone to unmute and say thank you and good evening or good afternoon, as it is in much of the country here. And if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to do so.
Yes, please do so. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you so
lovely.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much, Ali.
Thank
And
you.
we will see
Bye,
you
everybody.
soon. Take
Bye.
care. Bye, everyone.
Mhm.